Hey coconuts, yes, I know you know that I'm no longer in Singapore and a lot of you are super excited for me. You have DM'd me, talked to me on Telegram, Instagram, what have you. Asked me all sorts of questions, give me your greetings. And I decided that, why not I put together some of these common questions because I think those are good questions. And I do believe that a lot of us are entertaining this idea that, maybe I could live elsewhere for a while. So with that in mind, there are some common questions and common insecurities and common hurdles that a lot of us will have to jump through before we muscle up the kind of courage to quote unquote leave Singapore for a while. At least to, spend a year or two elsewhere in a slower pace to reimagine life, realign ourselves, and come together to know, hey, maybe this is the kind of life that I want. Right? So a lot of questions, a lot of things to share with you. I'm going to focus on 3 questions to ask yourself before you leap out of Singapore. Good morning, everyone. I welcome you to another day with the Financial Coconut. In our podcast, we're debunking financial myths, discovering best financial practices, and discussing financial strategies that fit our unique life. You get it. Ultimately empowering us to create a life we love while managing our finances well. And today, I'm going to spend some time to talk about the 3 questions you should ask yourself before you leap out of Singapore. Okay, I know there are a lot of things to ask, a lot of things to clarify, a lot of small little things that you guys have asked me, and I will work through all the little pointers as we go along in today's discussion, but all arced within the 3 main questions that I've kind of consolidated as a basis to kind of ask ourselves, right? Like, what do we want? Why do we want to leave? And in the process of going out there, what do we hope to achieve? And how is life going to be out there? Like, I especially recognize the kind of anxiety after staying in the island for a while, right? So for all of you that are stuck in Singapore during this whole pandemic, you've not gone out, you've not done all of whatever stuff that you want to do. It is hard. It is hard to leave and all that. And it's especially hard for a lot of people that do not have friends around them that are more well traveled and more explorational, right? So there's some people with friends all around you that, migrate to Canada, live in the US, study in the UK, some working in China, some of them living in Bangkok, and then they kind of move around in and out. So you find it like, oh, okay, I know life can be like that. There are more possibilities and more dynamic choices, right? And you don't feel alone in this process, right? So that is, I would say, a lot of the more privileged kids, like, people that go to good school, come from good families, scholars, and what have you, right? So that is that bunch of people, but there are also, in this whole process, I'm sure a lot of people have accumulated some wealth, just even though they're from the working class, got a decent career, they accumulated some wealth, and now these bunch of people, the newer millennials that have kind of gathered a little bit of money, start to question the narrative and want to explore out there, but don't really have a lot of friends to kind of model around. And all of you start to ask questions, right? So today I'm going to try my very best to give you some good thoughts. Okay, so I think there are a lot of angles to go about pursuing this question of how to leap out of Singapore, especially where a lot of people, Singaporeans being Singaporeans, they don't want to have any form of sacrifice, right? Everything is a plus. It must add. Not everything is a plus. And it becomes like, what, if I lose on this, I lose on that. And then what do you gain out on the other side, right? So those are some questions that we will talk about as we chug along on today's topic. But before we begin on today's topic, I want to challenge a little bit of the narrative in Singapore. Why? Okay. So I'm going to challenge the nation's narrative, not in the sense of trying to be a radical, but to help us better understand where does Singapore sit in this global order? How are we as a nation actually? And from there, I think we find more comfort in trying to recognize the kind of future that we can live and all that jazz, right? So it may be a little bit uncomfortable for some of you, but I'm going to just share this idea that for the longest time, people think we fishing village from nothing becomes something, right? I think that is false. Jeng jeng. I think this is important. Give me a little bit more time on this, okay? So you must understand first, okay, I know we can go super, like long time ago, but let us just start with colonization. So you must first understand the motive of colonization. The Portuguese were the first bunch of people that tried to colonize the world. And of course, they tried to colonize the world because why? They were struggling in Portugal itself, right? So the Europeans were fighting and all that jazz, they actually lost to the Muslims for a very long period of time. Yeah, so that's a story for another day. But the Portuguese went out to try to conquer other lands so that they can grow, because within their own land they were struggling. So after that, everyone else kind of follows suit. The central idea is all of them went out not to nation build. Okay, remember this. They go out of their mainland, not to nation build, they go out of their mainland to conquer resources to bring back to their own nation for whatever incentive structure. So when they come into this part of the world, the Indonesian or the Malayan archipelago, this part of the world was already the spice hub. It was called the Spice Islands for a long time. In other words, we were trading spices with all around the world. Like, this area was producing a lot of spices and was shipping out to all these different parts of the world already. And of course, the Arab traders were famous since then. And the Chinese actually came in much later as coolies because they were struggling in China mainland. But okay, those are history. And history is a little bit interesting because he say, you say, who is right? But you just look at incentive system, right? First is colonization. Their goal was not nation built. They came here to monopolize and control certain trade routes to bring back to their own place. In other words, Singapore was already wealthy. Wow, I scared I get puff pass, yeah. But yes, just gotta look at some history books, they will talk about it. Read some of the post-colonial ideas, okay? So Singapore was already wealthy. We already was a port of the world. So for the longest time, we have been a port. Okay, and this is what is interesting. For the longest time, we have been a port. People come here to trade. People didn't stay here. Not a lot of people stayed here. Okay, so all your Malaya, the traders, they will live in the Ipoh, live in Malacca, live in wherever they live in. They come here to trade for 1 to 2 weeks. After that, they leave. They go back to their hometown. Okay, this has been like that since forever. Only really after the whole independence situation where we start to segregate ourselves, right? Where we build up this customs and freedom of movement was controlled. And then it became like, oh, you got to apply for a visa, apply for work permit. They control a lot of these things in and out. That it became like we have more and more native population. Now, of course, the Singapore government, in order to grow itself as an independent nation, tried very hard to bring in all these people and kind of incentivize or force or whatever you want to put it, a lot of Malaysians and people within the region to become natives of Singapore and take on a Singapore identity. Important, why I go through 2 minutes, 3 minutes of this thing is to understand the natural order of how life was like in the past before we became a nation. So this becomes an important anchor of how you should look at Singapore, how Singapore has and always been a part of the global order. Okay, we have always been a port. We shouldn't romanticize how much more amazing we are and blah, blah, blah. We are just fundamentally a port in the global order. So because we are a port in the global order, I do think a lot of us, we should move around and kind of see what's out there and leverage on our country as a port, as a hub, as a place to commerce, to transact, to kind of do a lot of interesting things rather than a place to live. Okay? So this is my personal view. You don't need to take it. But I believe that if you're listening all the way until here, you're kind of thinking of like, yeah, maybe there's a different way to live as a Singaporean. And I do think so. Okay? So which is why I'm going to share with you some pointers to help you leap out of Singapore. I'm not saying that you definitely need to migrate outwards. Singapore has its own perks, has its own problems, as with anywhere, okay? But I'm not discounting the perks nor the problems. But I think for a lot of us that are thinking of living elsewhere for a while, to explore life elsewhere, this is a good basis to first understand Singapore as a nation. Where are we? Where were we? And where is our global order? Okay, and how can we do better for ourselves and for the nation? Okay, so understand this part. Now I'm going to give you 3 questions to ask yourself how to leap out of Singapore, okay? Or find comfort that you can leap out of Singapore, okay? First question that I think you should ask yourself while planning your leap out of Singapore, whether it's long-term, short-term, First question is, will you be recreating your life elsewhere? Answer is yes. Very likely, very, very likely. I know a lot of times when we are trying to live elsewhere, whether is it Bangkok or whether is it Malaysia or whether is it the UK, Taiwan, wherever you want, right? So the beauty is we even have options. So quite cool that way, okay, because our visa strength is there. We can move around. It's much easier. Our passport strength is there. a lot of times when people think of all this, right, they will romanticize, like life. Wow, so much more possibilities out there. The truth is, yes, there are a lot of possibilities out there. Maybe more permutation than what you can get or afford in the very expensive land of Singapore. Okay, but what is the likelihood? The likelihood is you will revert to your familiarity of life. Right. So, in other words, Singaporeans' lives, every Singaporean's life revolve around a small living space, public transport, uh, the public pool, public health facilities, and you know, sounds a bit sad after I name it kopitiam downstairs, the bar at night sometimes. So you will very much revert to your way of life. Okay, I'm not saying you definitely will, but I'm trying to give you comfort in this reality that you are very much going to be creating your life that you're familiar with in this other place, because that's my personal experience, and I've talked to a lot of people. I know this is a lot of their experience, right? As much as we will sneak in more stuff, like maybe our weekend hangout is no longer just hang out at Botanic Garden. We go climb mountains, yes. Maybe the hangout with the friends will no longer just be drinks, like we'll make dumpling together, so there's some of these changes, but the general form should be pretty much the same. In other words, what should you look at, right? In other words, when you're costing your life, or you're costing your life in a potential new place, you really don't need to care about the overall living cost index. All right, because a lot of people will search, but wow, this place very expensive, very expensive, very expensive. Yeah. All these places are very expensive, or maybe all these places are very cheap, very cheap, very cheap. Yeah, very cheap, very cheap. Whatever. But that kind of costing index, more often than not, a lot of the information online, more often than not, are catered to the Westerners, catered to the Europeans, catered to the Americans. They have a certain way of life, especially the Americans. They're very unique one. The moment you see them out there, wow, this guy American, right? So, so they have a certain way of life, and they have a certain costing structure, like eating out at the restaurants, the kind of tax and all those additional things that is very built for their life. And all your cost living index and all that is very much for the Americans. Don't need to read into those things. Just go to Airbnb, search apartment pricing, how much will it cost, and average out the size of the apartment that you'll be used to. If now you live with your family or you live in a small rental apartment, you will more or less, appreciate 2 times more that size. When I was living in KL, to be honest, it's a 2-bedroom apartment. I had so much space, I don't know what to do. I had to think like, maybe I should make this space into something else. That's why I had the extra room at Alisa or Airbnb. Right? So you will pretty much go for what you're familiar with, right? And that is a good basis to understand. Okay, so that will be costing for your rent. As for food, just look for groceries if you cook a lot. Gym, look for gym prices. What I'm saying is not telling you how to live, but telling you that you just need to recreate your life in another location. Very likely that's the situation, and you don't need to mesmerize over all those kind of cost index, blah, 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 blah. Just go and search for the exact prices, and that will be your costing. So if you're planning to live abroad for a while, try a 3 months, 6 months, 1 year situation, then you just cost accordingly, right? And you realize it's actually not very expensive. Honestly, it's not very expensive. A few $1,000s to go and experience a different way of life for an extended period of time in a different location, I think it's worth it. Right? So it does not actually set back your financial plan. So yeah, that's the first thing you should ask yourself when preparing to leap out of Singapore. Are you going to recreate your life elsewhere? Chances are you are. So because you are, all the online information, a little bit wonky. Okay, that's my personal experience, I can tell you, because it's targeted at Ang Mo, not targeted at you. Okay, so I think that's the situation for a lot of us. Which brings me to question number 2, and the question is, what are you really losing out on? Okay, it's hard. This question a bit hard. And I'll come back to you after a word from our sponsor. Okay, this question is complex, okay, on a few levels. There are a few things to unpack. Okay, first thing is, what is your natural trajectory? Like, given in your life in Singapore, what is your natural trajectory? The narrative is you're going to work a job, get promoted, move up the career path, buy a house, settle down, blah, 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 right? Which I don't think we should hate it, although I clearly am not a big fan. You can hear it from my voice. but it is what it is. You can choose to play the game. It's not a problem. Right, but it is what it is. So what are you really losing out on? That's a big question mark, right? And some people say, oh, what if I get my house later? It's like, are you even attached now? If you're attached now, then okay, you get a house now. But if you're not, then what's stopping you from just going out there and just kind of find your partner maybe in elsewhere And what have you? And if your partner is as adventurous as you, then why not just go and live elsewhere for a little bit of time to get to know each other better and kind of figure out what do we really want, right? So I don't think there's a lot to lose in terms of like, oh, you know what? If we get a HDB flat later, like really HDB flat, why are you so excited about it? It's just a box, okay? So well, later I get cancelled, yeah, very stressed. But yeah, I'm personally okay. Not a big fan of HDB flats, But okay, but I must say, the Punggol Living Estate is getting nicer. The newer Punggol near the Coney Island is looking nicer. Tengah is looking nicer. So I like the HDBs doing initiatives to make it nicer. But like I said, for the longest time, Singapore has always been a transient port, a hub, right, for business, for commerce, and a lot of people live in other parts of the Malayan archipelago, right? And I think that is something that we can all think about, as we move along down this path. Okay, so what are you really losing out on? Back to the question: 17% CPF contribution because your boss is no longer contributing to your CPF. Is that one of the major concerns that people have when thinking of like leaving Singapore for a while? Let me give you some brutal reality. Yeah, as a employer myself, I never ever see CPF contribution as my part contributing to your salary. I've always seen it as this is your salary. This is part of your salary. So the 17% CPF contribution from me as an employer is your salary. It's not my contribution to you. So I factor the whole thing. If I pay you 5K after all the contribution together, you cost me 5K on my balance sheet. And that's all I care about as an employer. And I tell you that's what a lot of people care about. Okay, a lot of capitalists, a lot of employers, businessmen, and it's not about being like, oh, so evil, so but it's not. It's not. Don't evilize anything. Okay, but it is just the reality when I calculate my finances. That is how I see it. So while the narrative is, oh, you contribute 20% to CPF, your employer contributes 17% to CPF. I know it's a bit hard. I know I may get POFMAT, but I think it's really the whole thing is your contribution. The whole thing is your contribution. The whole thing, when I see it, right, as an employer, I just see it as this is your salary. I will not factor it differently. In all honesty, lah, in my view. Okay, so as an employer, or maybe before that you never take CPF. After that you start to take CPF for whatever reason from me. That means I got to give the 17%. I will not see it as this me giving. I'll see it as me giving you a pay raise. Okay, this is honest view. Okay, in as an employer's point of view. Yeah, so I think that's something that we need to recognize, right? So when we look at our jobs, when we look at how we plan our career and all that, I think this is a reality that a lot of people need to kind of wake up to, right? Are you really losing out on it, or has this always just been a part of your salary? So this is something to think about. Okay. Yeah, so I think that is important. And also these days, I think a lot of companies are more open to transfers, sabbatical, reduce roles and all that. So as long as your long-term kind of plan is intact, then what are you really losing out on? When I tell my friends ask me, oh, you're not scared, later next time your CPF not big enough. I'm like, girl, I have enough money to pay down payment. I don't need CPF. If I really come back and I want to get a HDB, I have the cash to just pay cash. I don't really need to, be concerned or if I have CPF and blah blah blah. That thing don't matter to me. And I'm not saying that in the sense of like, oh, CPF is evil, blah blah. No, CPF is a state fund to take care of the people, etc., etc. But if I'm not plugged into the system, then I don't really need to care about how the system affects me as much, right? Of course, nowadays I contributing CPF, guys, just saying. Yeah, company paying me money now, so I got contribute CPF. But yes, whatever it is, I think what is important is you gotta ask yourself what is your probability of meeting the narrative. If your probability of meeting the Singapore's narrative is like 95% or like 100%, because I think most people will meet the narrative. Okay, most people that are listening to the podcast will readily meet the narrative, getting a job, getting a HDB, settle down, blah blah blah. It's not that difficult if you're plugged into the system. Okay. So if your probability of hitting that is so high, then what is your concern about plugging yourself out for a year or two? Like, what are you really losing out on? That is a big question mark, that I think a lot of people need to have. Okay? Of course, I know it may be a little bit of a sacrifice, or it feels like a little bit of a sacrifice, which brings me to my third point. The third question you should ask yourself when considering leaving Singapore and staying abroad for a while is, what can you bring back? Okay, this is the third point, extremely important. What can you bring back? So I think this is the part that a lot of people don't talk about. In Singapore, a lot of people talk about, what if I lose this? What if I lose that? What if I lose everything is about what if it gets worse? But what about all the upside that you can bring? All the people that you will know on your travels, all the interesting stories and ideas you will gather on your travels, all the experts that you'll meet, all the connections that you will connect. And don't forget, Singapore is a port. Singapore is a trading hub. Singapore is a tax-free zone or super low tax environment. Why capitalists like to go to Singapore? Because we are a port, because we low tax, because we got no capital gains tax, we got free visa, free travel, a lot of places. So why aren't you using it? If you are in Singapore, nobody cares about all these things about you because everybody has equal access to low tax, no capital gains, everybody has equal access. But when you're out there, you are key to this whole access, If you didn't realize, right? If you are a Singaporean, you go out there and then you talk to all these Russian people. I mean, that's what I've been doing, right? Talking to all these Russian people around, the Turks, because I'm in this part of the world and they talk to me, they're very interested because I am a citizen of one of the largest port in the world, low tax environment, no capital gains tax. And I can readily start a business just with a click of a button. I scan my SingPass, I can register, and we can fly. Right? So, and I can move around very readily. They want me to go Russia, okay, let's go. I want to go Africa, okay, let's go. I don't need to apply visa, I can move. Right? So, whether you do business in the end, that's a different question. But at the core, I want to open up your mind to ask ourselves, what can we bring back? We can bring back all these experts, all these connections, all this friendship, all these resources, and leverage on what we as an individual, as a citizen of this nation, what do we have? I think that's the part that a lot of people, they don't recognize. Like you talk to your Singaporean, you have equal access to all these things, but nobody use it. Because we don't need, right, in our own country. But the moment we go out, wow, we become amazing. We become very unique. Right? And people want to talk to us and we become valuable. And that is the reality that I face. Okay, that's the reality that I experience. Tons of people ask me to go to Africa. Hey, join me in Africa. Let's do something here. Blah, 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 blah. I'm like, it's okay lah. I'm very busy already with what I do. But it's about the doors, it's about the opportunity. And if you're in, let's say you are an artist, you are in a career of design, you go to all these other places, opens up your mind, you get to connect with the local community. Or even if you are in finance, you get to come here and then, go to Moscow and ask like, hey, how is finance really done in this place? Or you can go to Switzerland and see what's going on. Even go to Thailand and kind of see like, how is finance done here? So there are a lot of things that you can bring out of. And I will say safely that most of the people that you meet will be of a higher social class. Okay, the people that are of a quote-unquote lower social class, it's very hard for you to meet them unless you take serious initiative to hang out with them, spend time with them, and you go on a trip focused on that. Right? So, like it or not, I know it's a sensitive topic, talk about social class, but like it or not, it's broadly going to be beneficial for you to be out there, to see what's out there in the world. Right? So what can you bring back? Ask yourself that. So I think these are three great questions to start with, when planning your potential leap out of Singapore, planning your trip to get out of Singapore, or to kind of overcome that pressure of like, what if I lose out on certain things, blah, blah, blah. Because the truth is you will lose out on certain things. But what are all the other stuff that you can come along with, right? And I'm going to sum up today with these three questions for you, right? Number one is, will you be recreating your life elsewhere? Chances are you will. So, in other words, it's actually not that expensive to live a Singaporean life in another country. Okay, no matter how expensive, quote unquote, the country is, it tends to not be as expensive to live a Singaporean life, which is like public transport, cook at home, small place, gym, swim, go to the bar, kopitiam, it's not that difficult, really, okay? Number two is, what are you really losing out on? I reiterate that your probability of meeting the Singapore narrative is 95%, or even 99%, right? The Singapore government tries very hard to make sure you are part of the narrative, and the system is built in such a way that, it ensures very high chances of you becoming part of the narrative and succeeding, quote unquote, in the narrative. right? So if your probability, your propensity is so high, then what are you really losing out on? You're not, right? You can readily come back and let yourself back into the system, right? And all your 17% CPF contribution, I know this is a little bit like a question mark, but yeah, to me, it's really that it's part of your pay lah. It's not employer contribution, right? So I think that's important, and of course, recognizing that these days a lot of companies are more open. You can ask for transfer, sabbatical, reduce roles and all that, and yeah, you can actually keep your income and all that, even on the go, or even out there living elsewhere. And question number three is, what can you bring back? Look at the upside, right? And of course, I'm doing a little bit of a dream building. What can you bring back? Because it's hard to measure. It's very easy to measure what you will lose. It's very hard to measure what you can potentially gain, right? Which is why growth stocks and even crypto, it's like a little bit of it requires a little bit of imagination, right? And all that, right? So like, what can you really bring back? Right? The experiences, the local networks that you will meet, the kind of opportunities that may open up, and at the core, you will bring back a different purview of the world. You will expand your worldview. And I think that is important, beautiful, exciting. And it's going to make your life richer. It's going to bring up your value, really, in my view. Even if when you come back to Singapore, or even if you don't. Right. So with that, I hope you find more comfort in potentially exploring to stay out of Singapore for a while. I know if you have families, you have all that, then your concerns are even more complicated. But I'm speaking to the millennials that are listening in, 35. Most of us, this is our demographic. And for a lot of us, if you're young, a little bit crazy, a little bit wild, want to go out there and explore the world, hey, why not? I hope these three questions help you, and I hope you learned something useful today. See ya. Hey, I hope you learned something useful today and truly appreciate that you took time off to better your life with the Financial Coconut. Knowledge is that much more powerful and interesting when shared, debated, and discussed. Join our community Telegram group, follow us on our socials, sign up for our weekly newsletter. We are doing a weekly newsletter reboot. We're going to have a lot of information within the newsletter. Everything is in the description below. And if you love us and want to help us grow, definitely share the podcast with your friends and on your socials. Also, if you have any interesting thoughts you want to share, or you know someone that we would like to hear from, reach out to us through hello@thefinancialcoconut.com. With that, have a great day ahead. Stay tuned next week, and always remember, personal finance can be chill, clear, and sustainable for all. Okay, yeah. So I think there are many ways to tackle this, right? I could have tell you that, oh, you must plan your finances, make sure you meet how many months or all these things. Make sure your financial plan in Singapore is blah 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 blah. I mean, like those things everybody know, and you've heard it time and time and time and time and time again. And I think nobody really cares about that. When they're thinking of trying to leave Singapore or leap out of Singapore, the concern is really the kind of loss aversion, right? People are afraid. What if I lose out? And what can I really get out there, right? And I will say, when you're young, you should go out there. I really think so, right? As we grow older, we will be less able to move around. Physically, it's true. I don't know if you guys feel so. I feel so. There was a period of time I felt so insecure because I felt like I was aging. I felt like my body took longer to heal and all of that, right? So I really think as we grow older, we will naturally stay at a place for longer. We will cement down longer, and all the things that you want to explore and do, you try to do it young, lah, right? So go out there. Eventually, you will find a place to settle down. And if after you try a few locations, maybe in Portugal, maybe in Thailand, Malaysia, Taiwan, maybe not Taiwan, Taiwan a bit stressed these days. Or what have you, right? New Zealand, Australia. Ultimately, you decide that Singapore is your place, then okay, Singapore can be your place, right? There's no one size fit all, and Singapore has its perks, has its amazingness, right? The transport system is amazing, the public pools are amazing, and I do miss the library. Chicken rice, all of that, yeah, I can cook, lah, so it's not as big of a problem. Also, yes, last advice for all of you: if you're planning to travel or you're planning to live abroad, try to learn to cook some of the things that you like to eat in Singapore, okay? Or at least buy those instant stuff. It will help you from time to time to rekindle memories. And yeah, food is very powerful in the whole emotional nostalgia kind of way of life, okay? So these are some of the pointers that I think you should check out. And yeah, we'll see you next week. Take care, guys.